goes to the heart of who we are as South Africans. What happened defines us as a nation. It highlights what individuals went through to bring about the freedoms and the democracy that we all enjoy today. I think it's important that the Born Frees, but also South Africans as a collective, understand the cost that was borne by a group of individuals to bring about those very freedoms and the democracy and the birth of this new nation.
Well, it actually speaks to a very decisive era in our history. And Tata Madiba has said himself on several occasions that it took a collective effort, like you're saying, by South Africans, races of all, people of all races, all backgrounds coming together to topple the apartheid regime of the time. How does the centre reflect that?
Well, the aim of Liliesleaf is to preserve a period in South Africa's history, particularly the period from 1960 to 64, because unfortunately, this is one of the most critical periods in our liberation struggle, but I believe one of the least known and least documented in terms of what happened and how important those events that took place during that period had a very defining impact on the trajectory in terms of the struggle going forward up until 1990 with the release of Nelson, and ultimately culminating in 1994 with the first free and democratic elections.
This is quite interesting. You're also of the belief that a space like Vlakplaas, a notorious Vlakplaas, should be restored and preserved. Tell us why.
Well, I think one just has to look at Auschwitz, Birkenwald, Treblinka and the concentration camps. They tell a horrific story in our history. And I think it comes back to the fact of the past can be repeated. There is no guarantee that just because it happened once, it won't happen again. And we're seeing the very same things happening, for example, in the 90s in Rwanda. We also saw it in the 90s in the former Yugoslavia. So sites like Vlakplaas, though they tell a story which is unpleasant and can be extremely traumatic and painful for individuals, it's important that they are preserved so that they tell the story so that we understand why we mustn't go down that path again.
You've often referred to Liliesleaf as a centre of memory rather than a museum. Why is this?
Well, I think partly because the way I define it, a museum in most cases is man-made in the sense of building, artworks or some form of exhibits go into it. Liliesleaf was a place of activity. I call it kind of a natural man-made place. It evolved, and it evolved into a place where the liberation movement met. And that is why it is defined, in my opinion, as a site of memory. And it has been articulated in terms of Pierre Nora writes about sites of memory, places that preserve and in those sites encapsulate the past, and in particular history.
How do we make sure that the younger generation continue to visit places like Liliesleaf and keep the interest alive, especially seeing that as South Africans it does seem like we're suffering from a little bit of what's called liberation fatigue?
I wouldn't say liberation fatigue, but you're right. But I would also say an indifference to history. There is a lack of appreciation of our past. Not just of our liberation history, but of our collective history as South Africans. And it's important that we ensure that places like Liliesleaf are kept alive. I mean, Mandela, everyone knows Mandela, but there's nothing to say that in years to come they may recognize his face, but they may not understand what he stood for, what he did. And in order to ensure that that sort of scenario doesn't crop up and doesn't materialize, we must ensure that the narrative that goes along is preserved. And not just for Mandela, but for all the others that played a key and critical role in our liberation struggle, like Oliver Tambo, like Wilton McQuay, Andrew Mlangeni, Denis Goldberg, and the other Rivonia trialists, Z.K. Matthews, J.B. Marks, Duma Nokwe. It's important that these individuals their memories are preserved and kept alive through the narrative of our history.
Very quickly, tell us about the Rivonia 10 medallion that was launched this Tuesday. What's the intention behind a project like this, Nicholas?
Well, it goes to the heart of trying to memorialize and immortalize these individuals.
There we have a picture. It looks like a magnificent piece.
It is. I mean, it's got the names of the trialists in order of their accused number, and it's to try and address that matter of ensuring that the history is not forgotten. And through a coin is one way of doing it, but in doing it in a way that also has a narrative that runs with it, so people understand what these individuals stood for, what they meant, why are they called the golden generation, the selfless sacrifice. I mean, if I may just finish off by saying, when Nelson said, "I am prepared to die," he wasn't just talking about himself, he was talking about the other accused as well, that they were willing to give their lives for the cause to bring about a new South Africa that was predicated not on the colour of one's skin, but on the character of the individual and the morality of the people of South Africa.
Nicholas, I can't let you go without asking you this one. Have you found it yet? The gun that Tata Madiba is said to have buried somewhere on the grounds of Liliesleaf?
The answer is no. It is still like the Loch Ness Monster, and it is somewhere on the grounds, and we hope one day to continue the search for it.
Well, if you do find it, give me a call, please. We'll cover that story for sure.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicholas Wolpe. Well, moving on to